Hi everybody, I'm Natalie with Missouri Star Quilt Company, and I'm joined today by Jemima Flendt from Tied with a Ribbon.
Hi Natalie, how are you?
I'm great. I'm so glad that you're here today. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. I'm Jemima Flendt and I am the designer behind Tied with a Ribbon. I'm a quilt pattern designer, author and teacher, and I can't wait to show you the endgame quilt that we've got here today.
I love this quilt. I can't wait to make it with you. So let's get started. So I absolutely love this quilt. It's so beautiful.
The colours have come up so beautifully in it.
Yeah, it's bright and fun. So tell us, what do we need to make this quilt?
All right, so for the endgame quilt, you're going to need your pattern. You're going to need the equilateral triangle template, which is this lovely neon pink as well.
That's so cute.
You're going to need, in terms of your fabrics, we've got here the beautiful colours that we're using for our equilateral triangles. You've also got some of the other ones, and this here is our binding fabric. We've got our background fabric in the white here, and this here is our backing fabric that we've chosen for this particular design. Then you're going to need some notions and some equipment as well. So we've got our rotary cutter, we've got some pins. There's also some number pins, and I'm going to show why we use the number pins and why they're really helpful for this project.
Yeah, they're a great tool.
Yeah, and we've got some best press as well to help with our sewing.
Excellent.
Natalie, with your background fabric, we are going to need to give it a press so that you can cut down your strips from that. So with your background fabric, you're going to cut your strips down into 8.5 by width of fabric strips, so that you're ready for the next step of cutting your equilateral triangles.
Excellent. So you've got one prepared for us already.
That's
so I'll
it.
move this so we can turn that and subcut
out of the way as well.
Yeah. I'll just put that up here in case we need it later.
Now, with your equilateral triangles, one of the important things to remember is that you always want to cut them from the selvage edge of your fabric first of all. So if you're leaving your width of fabric with the seam line down the centre, you always want to make sure that you're cutting from the open edge, because if you start cutting at the folded edge, you actually won't have enough pieces.
Yeah, you run out of fabric because you can open the fold when you get there and get like one more piece.
Exactly, that's right. So you save on a lot of fabric, and it makes it really, you've got the right
number.
number.
That is a very helpful cutting tip, because I mean, anytime you're cutting your fabric, start from the selvage edge and go towards the fold instead of, you know.
Yeah, because if you've ever run short on a piece, that could sometimes be why.
It's the, that can be the difference.
Yeah. So with your equilateral triangle template, you'll find that it will actually fit perfectly to your cut size strip.
Excellent.
And then with your rotary cutter, this little piece here is a scrap, so we're not actually going to use it, but in the pattern there's also a mini quilt. So if you actually want to, you can take the size triangle that you get that's also in the center here, and you can actually make your mini quilt from it as well. So it's not wasted, it's just saving it for another project.
Awesome.
So with your triangle template, what you're going to do is you're going to take your rotary cutter, and what we're going to do is we're going to trim down our triangles now with our rotary cutter. Always cutting away from ourselves.
So is every triangle in this quilt that size?
It is, yes.
That's cool.
So sometimes people are like, but how am I going to make those triangles so big? And it's not that the triangles are actually that large, they're all made from this size triangle.
In the color placement.
Yes.
And that's very
so
cool.
make sure, of course, because you don't want to be cutting towards yourself, just very gently turn your fabric around. And we're also going to cut off the actual little corners that you can see on this template as well. So when we get to sewing, you'll actually realise how helpful it is having those pieces trimmed off already, because it helps with your seam allowance as well.
It does, especially with triangles. I found that to be incredibly helpful.
Yeah. So here you've got your first two triangles. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue down the line, trimming up our triangles from our template until we've gone towards the folded edge. Now in the pattern, it has all the requirements for how many triangles you need to cut for each colour as well. So make sure you check back in your pattern, and they are all listed there for you.
That's awesome. That is one of the things that I find, because sometimes I make a quilt from my head before I have a pattern, right?
Yep.
And it is difficult because I don't know ahead of time how many 8.5-inch strips I need of each color.
Exactly.
And so a lot of times I cut way too much or not quite enough. And a pattern is just amazing for that. I love having that extra bit of information.
Yeah. Just means too that you can count them all up before you get ready to sew, and then you've got the total amount that you need.
Yeah.
All right, so you're going to want to cut not just your background fabrics, but all of the fabrics which are listed in the pattern. There are different quantities for those, so make sure that you check that and you have the right number of triangles cut for each of the colours in the pattern.
So Jemima, can you show us how to cut this last piece from the fold?
Sure. What happens is we've gotten to the end of cutting and it looks like we haven't got enough fabric, but we mentioned before that you can actually open this out, and what you want to do is just give that a nice press first of all, so that it doesn't so it sits nice and flat now.
Yeah, and if there's a fold or a wrinkle in the fold, you don't want that to change the size.
That's right. So we've now pressed that. So what we're going to do, this is where we get our final piece out of the row. So placing your template down, you may need to sort of slide it along a little bit because sometimes with the heat of the iron, the fabrics can slightly shift, but you'll still see that you've got there your 8.5-inch triangle ready for you to cut.
Yeah, plenty of room to get one more.
That's it. We only have that little bit at the end.
I do that even when I'm cutting strips and squares. Like, I love to make the best use of my fabric.
Exactly. You don't want to waste it, and it can certainly cut down the amount of fabric that you need to cut.
Yeah.
So there's our last triangle.
Excellent. So we go through and we cut all of our pieces. And we've got those done.
That's right.
So then what do we do next?
Okay, so once you've got all of your cut pieces, what you're going to want to do is you're going to use the pattern to reference the row layout guide. And that will actually tell you the order for all of the colour triangles. So you can see here.
So you wouldn't lay out the entire quilt. You would just use the row diagrams?
The row diagram will show you how to lay it all out. So I actually do like to lay it all out on the board or on a surface first, because sometimes you can actually change up some of the colours, or if you've got colours that are quite close together, you might sort of want to change them. And the beauty of this pattern is you can really sort of swap some of those colours out, or the prints, depending on what you're using.
So you can be creative.
You don't have
decide
to stick exactly
what sizes you want and what colors to put them in.
That's it. Yeah, and you might have some prints that are very close, depending on like some florals or different sort of elements, and you might want to move them around a bit. So you can certainly do that.
That's fun. Okay, so once you've got your layout, then you start stacking up your rows?
That's right, yes. So with the rows, one of the things also, so I like to stack them in the order as well, so that I keep all the pieces nice and
going the right direction.
Going in the right direction, yeah. Because unfortunately, as we sew today, you'll see if you sew some of them in the wrong order, because of the seam intersections in here, you'll actually need to take back a few pieces before you can actually correct if you've gone wrong. So it's always better to make sure it's stacked up in the correct order and that you're following that along as you go. So
and then this is also where you use your numbered pins, which I think is great. I typically just use a sticky note.
These are really handy because they actually help you keep your rows in order. But the other thing that they actually help you to do is to keep the bias of the triangle on the nice straight of grain.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's very smart. That probably makes it a lot less tricky to stitch and to machine quilt after.
That's right, yeah, because you've got the bias sides in the cut triangles, so you want to eliminate that movement in this project so that your triangles come together really nicely.
I love that. Yeah. That's a great tip.
So yeah, keep them together, have it marked, and then you always will make sure that you've got the first row in the correct order as well.
Okay.
So what we're going to do, we've got them all stacked up in the order, so what we're going to do is take the first piece and we sew them in order now, so we don't have to worry, everything's all set. And when we're sewing our triangles together, this is our first piece, and with solids it makes it really easy.
Yeah, there's not a wrong side, which is great.
Yeah, so you can keep it
but you still want them to go the right direction.
The right side together. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay this piece on top of our first piece in the row, and this is where those little straight edges that we cut off our triangle become really helpful because they also indicate your 1/4 inch seam allowance as well.
Excellent.
So it's a little helpful guide. So we're going to put some pins now along this side.
Okay.
Because you want to make sure when you're sewing this that you're sewing the correct side, because it can be quite easy to pick these up and start turning and sewing them in a circle.
Yes.
rather than the right, rather than in a straight
in a long
line.
straight row.
Yeah, so place those pieces together and with your pins. These are
That
nice
is
and brand
That's a
new.
helpful marker. You
Yeah.
know, just to be sure you've
It's
got the right side.
Yeah, it's very easily done sort of as you move along to tip them up the wrong way or to turn them, and especially because they're solids, it doesn't have that right or wrong side to make it really obvious.
Excellent.
So what we need to do now, and I know you're going to do this, is we're going to stitch from the top down to the bottom
Okay.
for our 1/4 inch seam allowance.
All right. So then as I go, I'm going to take these pins out, right?
Yes,
Because we don't want to run them
sew
over.
over your pins. No, it's really important to make sure that you don't sew over your pins.
Okay.
Don't need to do any damage to you or to certainly the
No.
machine as well. So keep them nice
Yep,
and
that can break a needle for sure. Put that back in
Yeah.
there. There we go.
great. So make sure you keep it the right way up. And this is where it becomes really handy, again, that you've put that number pin in because it's
Now
just...
you know that's your first one.
Yes.
You're not stitching to the other side of that.
Exactly. So
Now, do you press between every seam?
I like to actually press when I get to the end of the row.
Okay.
But what I'll do is I'll actually finger press that row down first.
Right,
You
'cause
can certainly press
I
it
would
in
say
between.
this junction is probably where those notches are more important to me.
That's right. So you can finger press it. What you can do is you can place a pin in it if you would like to hold it. Obviously take that out before you sew. But what you'll find is as you get more confident in sewing your triangles, that just through finger pressing.
little
But
finger
certainly
press is
if you,
great.
yeah, you can
Or
get
like
up each
one
time
of
to the
those
iron.
hair
A
markers,
yeah,
or
a
you know,
seam
just
roller.
slide it down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when it comes to our next piece with that, we're going to place that right sides together. And this is where you'll start to notice how you get the seam intersections with your pieces.
Yep. And as long as they cross a 1/4 of an inch, you'll
Yes.
keep your points.
Yep, and you'll have that little marker in the actual template piece because you've cut that off. So again, now we're going
love
to
that.
pin these pieces here now.
Okay.
This is why sometimes you can tip and turn up your pieces and get it out of. So we're going to sew now down the row.
side. Alrighty. So shall we go ahead and sew the whole row?
Yes, so because everything's now in order, what you can keep doing is just through finger pressing the next seam, it just means that you can keep sewing all of your pieces together in the row in the order indicated.
Okay. So I could just open this up here, do my little finger press,
Yes,
and then add my next piece
that's right.
to this side, yeah? And then line it up down there, make sure the notches are good. Put a couple of pins in it. Let's see if I can do this.
Yeah, they're nice
They
new
are
pins.
very,
Yeah.
very sharp. And then we'll just go from there.
So continue along the row.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got the whole row stitched. That was fun.
It's good fun, yeah.
Yeah.
So after you've completed the entire row, we're going to now press it. Now with this pattern, it's pretty forgiving in that I like to press all my seams to the right.
Okay.
But if you much prefer to press your seams open or to do that as you go for each piece, you're more than welcome to, because people like to press that each way. When we get later on in the pattern, we're going to open our seams.
Okay.
So
when you stitch your rows together, you press those seams open?
That's right. So it'll distribute the bulk out at that point as well. So
excellent. That's a great tip.
Yeah. So when you're pressing your rows, I like to start at this end, and what I'll do is I'll set all the seam first.
Okay.
So the only thing with the triangles is you've got the intersection which crosses over.
Right.
So I'll just press each of those first to set the seam.
Okay.
Because you've sewn the bias side of the triangles, you don't really want to move and shift the bias. So setting your seam first will really help to keep those
that prevents
together.
That from shifting.
Yeah. So I'll go through the row first and set
I've
them
always
all.
kind of wondered what setting the seam actually really does.
Yeah, a lot of people have heard about it or they've been told to do it, but don't
know
necessarily
why. Yeah.
And really it is to keep the top thread and the bobbin thread, the heat will actually connect those threads together, because they stitch and they sit on the top of your fabric or the bottom of your fabric for the bobbin.
It just kind of binds them with heat a little bit.
Yeah.
That's great. I love that.
Keeps it all nice and straight. So we're going to go down the row.
So it's particularly important when you're working with bias.
With the bias, yes. Which doesn't come into most of our pieced
not
quilts.
always.
But certainly with equilateral triangles, it'll really help keep everything nice and straight.
Yeah. I love that. I am a sucker for like finding out the why.
Yeah. It makes...
I love to know.
It's those things that make a little difference to your quilting all the time as well. So if you've got pieces that have ever been sort of waving or just don't sort of make straight lines, it'll really help.
That's so great. I love that.
So once you've gone along the line and it becomes a little bit, with a bigger ironing space, it's a lot easier.
That's true.
So now what you're going to do, so we've set the seam. Now what we're going to do is press that all in the direction towards the right.
Okay. And you start back at the end?
I do find it easier to go that way. That way I can have the overhang as I go along. And you can see here the beautiful intersections and that seam allowance that you've got as well.
So great.
Because we're going to need that for our
keeping
rows.
Keeping our points and making those colors match up from row to row.
That's right. So for each of the rows, you're going to repeat. So you want to sew your rows, you're going to then press them, and then we're ready to start to put our rows together.
All right.
So we've got here our second row. So this is row number 1, and row number 2, which we've already...
And that's also marked with its number.
That's it, so that we can keep everything nice and in the correct order.
Excellent.
So now what will happen is, as you start to see the rows being put together, you'll notice how the colours start to make the patterns
start to develop,
the diamonds and the
triangles larger triangles
all come together.
That's
and this
great.
is definitely where you see that this is not just one triangle, but it's many triangles put together to make that shape.
That's great.
Yeah.
So then do you pin the rows as well?
Yeah, so with rows 1 and rows 2, and this is where you want to pay particular attention to pinning, because you want to make sure that you keep those points of your triangles nice and sharp, so that you don't sort of have any square-edged triangles.
Do you have a tip for lining up the seams? Because that's one of those things that I struggle with, is like, you can push it one way or the other. On a straight seam, you can nest them really, really easily.
Yes.
This gets a little bit more confusing for me. So how do you do your pins and line up your
do that?
seams?
Yeah, well, let me show you. So when you come to put your rows together, what you'll actually notice is you've got that beautiful 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you've got the triangle from the row below. So what you want to do is you actually want to place those together, and I like to roll them up, because your the line that you're going to sew is actually down here
It's
at the
right
quarter
at
inch.
that quarter inch.
Yeah, and it's more important to worry about what's happening at these points than necessarily what's happening on the raw
edges.
edge. Yeah. So what I like to do is I like to roll those together and make sure that they are nice and together.
Right.
Then what I'll do is I'll pin that intersection
Okay.
to keep
Now,
that.
do you pin up and down horizontally or vertically?
I pin from right to left.
Okay.
Just because what happens is as I sew,
A little
I
bit
find
in
it
like
easier.
in almost like a diagonal.
That's
pinning.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, because I find
and that helps keep your points.
Yeah.
Excellent.
It means also too that I can actually run the sewing machine up nice and close
Before you pull that
before
pin,
I
and
pull the pin
hopefully
out.
they don't shift.
Yeah, so you haven't lost that point that you've spent all that time putting together.
Excellent.
So again, we just put those points together by rolling up the fabric,
Okay.
making sure that it's lined up, and you can just pull down the fabric to check. And so hold it with your fingers if you need to.
Yeah.
You can see that it's lined up nicely, and then you're going to put the pin in it. One pin. So just placing it down at the angle.
Okay.
And so we do that across the row.
For each intersection.
That's right. And if you feel that you need to put some more pins in, you're very welcome to do that. So you can see those beautiful points come together.
Okay.
It's always far easier when you've got a friend to to help do it.
So do you try to make the exit point where the pins mat or where
At
the
the
points
intersection, yeah.
meet? Okay. Let's see if I got it kind of close. I think so.
You can pin whichever direction you feel more comfortable to.
Well, I think being
'cause-
right-handed, it makes sense to go right to left.
Sometimes if people come from more of a dressmaking background, they have particular ways that they love to pin. So
Pinning and pressing too.
Yeah, exactly. So do what's comfortable and works best for you, really.
I love that. Practice and find your space.
So this is rows 1 and 2. And in the quilt, what I like to do is I'll actually, once I have all the single rows completed, I'll then go back and I'll work in pairs.
2 rows at a time.
2 rows at a time.
Okay,
All
that makes a
right.
lot of sense.
So when you come to sew it now, what you're going to do is you're going to start, make sure, and again, and this is where those pins just continue to help make sure that you've pinned the right side and you've
And
got
they're
it.
going the right direction and you're stitching exactly.
Yes.
Perfect.
So, and these sort of fold up really nicely.
Excellent. Kind of put it on my lap.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at a 1/4 inch along that top seam line.
So I'm going to pull this one pin out first.
Make sure you pull those out before you go along the line.
And this is also where you don't want to pull on or push your fabric because that will cause shifting.
Yes. And what you're really looking for is that intersection where you can see the 2 seams cross. So if you need to slightly maneuver this foot up a stitch or down a stitch, that will help to keep those points really nice and sharp.
Alrighty, got that stitched together.
Yeah, well, it's looking great. All right, so once you've got that whole row stitched together, then you might want to, you can always go along and check, oh, look at these points. They're absolutely
Oh, good.
beautiful
That
and
works. So that
spot
pinning,
on.
I think, is the
Yeah.
key, right?
Yes, and you can see here how you've got the absolute distinction between your pink
These 2
triangle and
colours.
the yellow one. So just taking your time and just doing that little pinning just really makes a big difference. So
Excellent.
we're going to now press that seam open for this row.
Okay.
And this helps to distribute out that bulk as well. So if you're worried that you've got lots of seams in one direction, you're going to now press this seam open.
Okay, I'm going to take these off so you have a little bit more space. So we just continue this the whole rest of the quilt, doing our
That's
our
right.
2 rows, and then you sew
Yep.
your sets of 2 together and
Yes.
so forth.
That's right. So eventually what you'll have is half the quilt go together. It just makes it easier than trying to sort of do 1 row at a time.
Yeah,
It
I
gets hard
find
to
that
manage.
it balances the weight,
Yes.
which prevents a lot of pulling and things going, you know, stretching.
That's right. And with the bias of the triangles, you certainly don't want anything to stretch more than it should. And also it makes it much more manageable through your machine as well.
That's right, yeah.
So, yeah. So that there is our
First 2 rows.
first 2 rows,
I love it.
all done and pressed.
Oh, that looks so great.
Yeah. And you can see the beautiful points that you've that we've made here. So they look great.
Yeah.
So yeah, take your time
That'll-
and continue that with the rest of the rows.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so we're going to continue sewing sets of 2, as we said
That's right.
before, to make the whole quilt.
That's right.
And, you know, hopefully you've got it all laid out ahead of time.
That's it. It makes it really easy to see and you can keep track of everything.
I love that. Okay, so I can see that the sides of this quilt are straight, but what we've got here is this triangle edge that is, it's going to go in
That's
and out,
right.
kind of like a zigzag. So what do we do for that?
Okay, so once you've got your entire quilt all put together, what you're going to do is you can take out your row marker pins,
Right.
because we don't want to run over those. And the important thing with this is to remember that we need this seam allowance
Okay.
at the beginning because that's actually where your binding is going to go. So
Right.
you want to make sure that you just don't,
So as you
trim.
line up your ruler, you're going to line it up and make sure and
Sure that
keep
you've
that
got the
quarter inch.
quarter
So
inch.
that's how you'll know where
that's
to
right.
set your ruler.
Yeah, so use your
And
ruler.
then you want to keep it straight along
Nice
the
and straight. You can
the
use one of the
seams.
markings on the ruler as
Yeah.
well.
I also usually will look at the seam here and make sure that it's also straight
another
with
great
my
line.
ruler, because
Yeah.
that way it just kind of keeps things in
Yeah.
line.
Well,
And
it's
if we're-
better to make sure than to trim it
Yeah.
off and then, yeah.
I like to have
Be too
multiple
late.
checkpoints.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're a quarter inch here,
That's
making sure to
right.
keep that, and then you
then,
just
so then just take the
just
rotary
trim
cutter
that straight
and
off.
make sure that you've got that all nice and straight.
That's so great. And you do this before quilting?
Yes.
Okay.
So you can always check with your quilter. Some of them prefer to, keep that, but usually I will
Typically,
trim
a
that off.
straight edge is easier
Yes.
to work with.
That's right. So then you've squared up your quilt and it's all ready then to be quilted.
Perfect. And there's no border.
No,
No.
no.
So what size is this quilt? It looks to me like it would be about a twin or a lap. Is there?
Yes, so a twin or a lap, it'll certainly, if you wanted to make it larger, you could actually extend out the background fabric as well.
Yeah.
And you'll have the beautiful pattern sit in the middle of the quilt.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, if you wanted to make it larger, you can also add another border if you wanted to as well.
Yeah.
So you've got
Very
some
cool.
great ways to make it larger.
So this beautiful machine quilting pattern is our chevron tumblers. It's one of our new patterns online, and I think it turned out great.
It looks
I love
fantastic, yeah, because it doesn't
It's
really
so cool.
detract from the design, but it really just finishes it off beautifully.
That's great. I
Yeah.
love that. And the backing that we used.
Got the Tula Pink.
Oh, the hexagons.
Yes,
That's so,
so
great.
fun.
I love the gradient
Yeah,
colors.
looks great.
That's amazing.
And it's really set well with that binding as well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so I think you have a surprise, a treat for me.
Yes, I also brought along the original endgame
Oh,
quilt that I
that's-
made. Yeah.
That's so great. I
so
can't
let
wait
me
to see
show
it.
you.
Oh, and it's custom quilted.
This
Look
is.
at that.
We'll turn it up this way.
I love it. I love too, you've got some prints in here. So you added a polka dot and a stripe.
That's right.
That is so beautiful.
With the quilting, you can really sort
Uh-huh.
of do as much or as little as you
Yeah.
like. I've also added in my long arm quilter, Carol Brady. She did a
Uh-huh.
fantastic job for me, so I didn't long arm quilt it. But I did go back and I put the beautiful hand quilting in as well.
Oh, that's
so,
wonderful. That
yeah.
looks so good.
So it's a great way to add some texture and some different dimension to your quilt as well.
I love
So,
that.
Yeah.
Well, this is absolutely beautiful, and I've had a great time. Thank you so much for coming to town and for teaching us.
Thank you for having me. It's been great, and I can't wait to see that all the endgame quilts that get made.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
So where can people find you to follow you?
Sure. If you're looking to find me, you'll find me at tiedwitharibbon.com. You can find me on Instagram at tiedwitharibbon and all the socials for Tied With a Ribbon.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Natalie. It's been great fun.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial with Jemima Flendt from Tied With a Ribbon on the Endgame quilt from Missouri Star Quilt Company. Thank you so much for joining me for this video today. I hope that you enjoyed it and that it inspired your creativity. And guys, we're at almost 1 million quilters strong in our community. So if you know of anybody that you think might like to join us and learn quilting with us, bring them on in, put your arm around them, and tell them to subscribe to our channel so that we can all learn and grow together.